kindred longevity lifestyle designers. This is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com as well as martin-kilgour.com. And in this ongoing video series, I am interested in going into depth of what exactly Jing is. And this first video is going to be an explanation of it. I've done other videos in the past about this and other sort of ideas of the three treasures. However, in this continual series, I'm going to just be focusing on Jing, and specifically the things that we can engage in that deplete Jing unnecessarily, and perhaps I'll even go into things that help preserve it. Now, my intentions for doing this is because my understanding of this very real foundational essence is continually evolving, and I have some new insights I'd like to share. So this is almost like, even though I've talked about many of these things before, I'm just sort of bringing in a new layer of this understanding that I've been experiencing. So right off the bat, I want to say that Jing, this is the first time you've heard the term, is a term used in Chinese metaphysical philosophy or experience. It's the term for the foundational core essence of the body. And this can be likened to the wax of a candle. And they have a three-treasure system where they talk about Jing, Qi, and Shen. And Jing is sort of the foundation of this, and without that, the others don't exist. They don't have something to stand upon. So Jing is like the candle wax and wick, and Qi is the burning flame, like the act of that Jing being transformed, which is the candle wick and wax, being transformed by the flame, into Shen, which is the end result, it's the purpose. It's the spiritual radiance, so that's the heat and radiance that comes off the candle. I mean, there's tons of different metaphors I could use, but that's the most widely understood one, and it's very simple and easy to understand. Now, there's very similar models for this three-treasure system, or trilateral system, in many other cultures around the world, and I want to relate those to those other systems if you're more familiar with those, so you can get an idea of how these pieces all fit together and are actually inherent in many of the mystery schools or metaphysical schools from the various traditions around the world. So in Ayurveda, they had the idea of the tridosha, and Ayurveda is an ancient Indian healing system. It's even more ancient than traditional Chinese medicine, some scholars say. And the tridosha was Kapha, Pitta, and Vata. And Kapha is related to Jing in their metaphysical understanding. Or this is a little more esoteric than some people might be familiar with, but it's still a very viable system for understanding health. And so being able to relate these different traditions and their understanding of these foundational three energies can give us a greater understanding of the roles they play and how this sort of pattern or framework can enhance our own health pursuits. So also in India, they had sort of the more metaphysical oriented yogis that had more of a spiritual practice, and they had a very similar system that they used, or their own terminology, that could be related to the Ayurvedic knowledge, which was, they used the terms ojas, prana, and tejas. So the tridosha system could be said as a little different than these three terms, and the three terms I just talked about are even more closely linked to Jing, Qi, and Shen, but ojas, prana, and tejas is just the Indian term. So if you ever come across those terms in your research or your pursuit of knowledge, then you can have a framework of how all these different systems link up. And the last one I want to talk about is sort of Western or shamanic traditions. They use the four elements. And there's a fifth element, which is spirit, which is sort of an all-encompassing factor. But the four elements, air, water, fire, and earth, can be related to this, except that earth is more of a all-encompassing factor. It's not so much one of these three foundational core aspects of our being. So water would be likened to Kapha, Ojas, and Jing. Air would be similar to Vata, Prana, and Qi. And fire would be likened to Tejas, Pitta, and Shen. And so with this understanding, we can kind of see that there's this three aspects of our being that is present in all cultures. And people might be wondering about the four elements system that I was just talking about. They haven't heard of it in that way. You can think of this whole idea of three aspects of our being as almost like a magnet, a tetrapolar magnet, or that means a magnet with three aspects. And when all three of these aspects are in balance and harmony within ourselves, no matter what our definition or terms for them are, we have what's called electromagnetism. It's that radiating life force, and that's a combination of the electric and magnetic fluids, and that's the Jing, which is known as magnetic fluid, or it's yin, and then we have the electric fluid, which is yang, or heat, or fire, and that's the Shen in Chinese terms. So if we think of it in terms of the Western terminology of the four elements, in terms of the four cardinal directions, we have the water as Jing, Ojas, and that core foundational energy, which we're going to focus on. Then we have air as the intermediary element, which keeps the yang, Shen, fiery element from basically being pulled into the yin at the same time. So this magnetism with the central energy that's holding these two apart is what keeps us alive. And technically speaking, when our Jing runs out, that idea of all that candle wax or that essence dissolving or running out, then we have a dissolving or a dissolution of all the elements or aspects of our being upwards. And in terms of the four elements, that fourth element is the earth element, which isn't included in the three, but it's actually what holds them all together. So when Jing, which is the water and technically part of the earth as well, which is also kapha in the Ayurvedic terminology, they see kapha as being actually a combination of water and earth. Now this might be getting too out there for you, but just bear with me because this is all going to make sense in the end. But this idea of that foundational energy, when it runs out or runs dry, then everything just suddenly goes upwards, and that's commonly known or understood in spiritual thought that when you die you sort of exit out your body. It's like a going upwards, it's like going towards the light, so to speak. And the light is an aspect of the fire, and technically speaking even fire dissolves into the absolute, or some in Taoism it's called the Tao. In some tradition they call it spirit, God, the Akasha in yogic terms. And so by understanding these aspects, we can have the goal of preserving them in their places and even extending their abilities of being there, which is the idea behind Jing, which is that foundational essence once again. And by maintaining that, preserving it, we're going to keep these elements separated in our being, which is going to lead to more longevity, more vitality in our life, and some say possibly immortality. So because there's sort of this understanding of Jing being a very fluid-like, having a fluid-like nature compared to water, Ojas, it's called like a mineral-dense solution. That's the understanding of Ojas. It's in the joints, it's in the kidneys, it's in all these very moist areas of the body in the highest concentrations, the reproductive fluid. These are all very mineral-dense, very full of vitality in these areas, and when they dry up, it's the characteristics of old age is the lack of an abundance of these fluids. So, you know, impotence, unable to reproduce, problems with the joints, problems in the spine, problems in the kidneys and adrenals and the endocrine system. These are all issues with fluids in the body. And Jing, Ojas, Kapha, qualities, whatever you choose to call it, the qualities of the water element and earth element, and whatever you choose to define it as, it's understood that this very sort of most basic foundation needs to be enhanced and kept from dissipating. So we can then start to understand that anything that's going to be sapping, draining, making these fluids murky and unpure is going to be leading to problems with Jing. So in this ongoing series, I'm going to focus each video. It's going to have part of the same title, so you can recognize it in the future when it comes out, but it's not going to be a set number of videos. Just whenever I feel inspired to create a video on the topic, it will come out. And I hope you can stay tuned and enjoy them as they come.